Hi, this is David with Shur-Loc Fabrics, and if you're looking for the Cadillac of easy stretchers, look no further. We have the Elite stretcher that we're going to be taking a look at today. So I'll go through a few of the components. We'll stretch up a fabric and you can see how everything works. So when you get it out of the box, you're going to have a few parts. Center bolt here that's going to go right through. So 5/16 hole. There's some instructions that will come with that. So we've already got that all set up. Just wing nut it up on the bottom. Then these little guys are actually holders for the tool itself. So you'll want to screw those into the back side. I've done that here, and maybe you'll need a little extension on the bottom side of your table, so that way you've got clearance. So when you rotate this Elite around, you're not going to have interference by hanging that on there. You want to make sure that this bottom portion of the Elite clears the handle here. So that's what I've done. It's really nice to have a hands-free spot where you can set the tool so you're not trying to set it on the table and have it fall off. So we've got those little guys you're just going to screw into the table if possible. I've got that all set up as well. And then there's just one more blank screw here, and that can be used for the removal angle. So I've got this little angle here. You literally can put it anywhere just so it's out of the way on the end of your table somewhere. And what you'll do is you'll have this, just leave the screw sticking out like that, put it on there and just hang it on. So another useful little screw that you can hang things on and just keep that so it's got a good home to go back to every time. I'm going to set mine here for easy access. We've got that. And then the last part here is you'll get an extra stretcher strip. So this is for the tool itself. So one comes on it. They're really easy to take out. You'll basically just slide it right out the end here like so, and slide the new one back in. We'll go over that a little bit more in detail as we go for stretching to make sure that you're doing everything that you can to prolong the life of that as long as possible. But we got a backup here for you. We got you covered. So set this aside as well. Just keep that in a safe spot so you know where it's at down the line. Once we've got everything set up here and you're mounted with your Elite stretcher, just make sure that you've got free clearance all the way around. It's good to have probably at least a 1-inch thick tabletop to mount to as well. You just want something that you can press on. It's not going to deflect and bow. You just want a stable work surface. So once we've got that, we can get our easy frame up here. One thing about the Elite stretcher, it's got some great features to it that we're going to go over, but it is a one size only type stretcher. So this is set up for a 23/31 only. So if you're thinking, I'm not sure which stretcher to get, if you think you're going to get multiple sizes down the road, we have some other stretchers that can do multiples instead. But this one's great for a single use, or a single size frame rather. So I'll get this mounted up on here. I'm just going to put my tension bars on here. Today we're going to be stretching up an endurance fabric panel. So load the tension bars on here just so everything's set and ready to go. And then we've got these little frame locks on here. So you can just turn these right over. And what that does is it not only obviously locks the frame down so it doesn't pick up on you, but it also centers the tension bar. So you can just get them pretty close, and that's going to tell you if it's centered left to right. Now they're only on the long sides, and that's because we always stretch the long side first. So if you get the long sides dialed in, the short ends will take care of themselves. So that's why they're just on the longs. So we can get that all set, and we'll start going here. So the way that you'll start off with an endurance fabric panel is you can see the stamp here right on the mesh. That indicates that we've got a 160 mesh here on this one. So I'm just going to lay it inside. I have the stamp in a way that you can lay it right towards you. It doesn't matter which way it goes, but you do want to be able to read it. You don't want to have it upside down so that it's backwards print. Lay that out so you can read it. Then you're going to take one of your nylon rods here. These are 3/16 diameter, totally reusable. You want to hang on to these down the line for future fabrics. But all I'm going to do is I'm going to start by inserting the rod into the pocket or the loop here that we have on the edge of the mesh. So I'm always starting with the long side. So we'll stretch that up first, loading that in. Just go ahead and take your tension bar. There's two slots here. So there's a stretcher one in the back, and then there's the one for the mesh in the front. So I'm going to be loading this mesh, and if you see, might be hard to see on the video there, but if you can see, I've left this about 1 inch shy of the end. I did that on purpose because if you stick it out the end, it's a little bit more difficult to load into. So if you just back that up, and no need to be super precise on that, but just leave yourself a little mesh. That way when you insert it into the tension bar, you just push the mesh in first and then the rod. So that makes it super quick and easy to load it into. And I'm just gonna slide that down. Once I get the panel onto the tension bar, I'm just eyeballing it and kind of pushing it down so the slack is out of it. Then I'll just hold those with my thumb like that, and then just take my index finger here and push the rod through. And I'm just looking for pretty close to even. So I'm just evening up that rod on both ends there. So get out the slack. We've got a total of 3 hooks on the Easy frame on the 1.5 and 125 series frames. This is a 125 series frame. It just has to do with the height and the profile more or less. But there's 3 total hooks. So I'm gonna go on, the inner hook is number 1, the center hook is 2, and the outermost hook when the tension bar is flush and fully, and where the panel would be fully stretched, is number 3. So I'm gonna go right in the middle here. So I'll call that hook number 2. So go ahead and go around to your parallel long side. So the tendency is sometimes just to work clockwise or counterclockwise and just hit each step as you go. But what we want to do is skip that, and we want to go work straight across to our parallel long side. Again, I've got one end of the fabric attached there. I came up short on my mesh, so I've got a little bit of mesh that I can just push right into the slot. Slide that right on down, center up my rod. Super easy. And this one you should be able to go by hook 2 as well by hand. Shouldn't have to use the stretcher yet. If you need to, you can check that step in a couple when we get to that point. So now once we've got both long sides on, you want to be careful so that you're not pulling on the mesh a ton, because there's no real tension on there yet. There's not enough tension to really do anything to prevent it from moving. So I'm just going to be a little bit ginger. You don't have to be super careful, but you want to prevent from just really pulling on the mesh until we get everything on there and locked in. I'm just working from short end to short end here. It doesn't matter which one you do first. Just get those all dialed in. And it's a good time to do a final check and just make sure that everything looks good. Hook 2 as well. So everything is on hook 2 on the frame, all the way around. Do one quick look on here, just check all your ends, make sure things didn't slide around, make sure your rods are still centered, and that your tension bars are centered as much as possible that you can see. Well, one thing we do want to avoid is having mesh hanging out off the end of the tension bar, because that can actually wrap around the point of the cut end, and it can actually poke into the mesh and cause premature failure. So make sure you're good and centered up before you start stretching. You can always go backwards and take it off, but try to prevent that if at all possible. So I've gone back to my original long side. You can do either long side first, it doesn't matter which one, but for sure a long side. Now I've got my stretching tool here. We've got our little strip, and it's best to, if you can lower the handle down. Once you start to use this strip a few times, it will want to go into the slot a little bit more easily, but when it's brand new, it's kind of stiff. This is a real coarse mesh on here, so it doesn't necessarily want to go in there too easily. But there's an aluminum connector that needs to go into the stretcher slot of the tension bar, and the best way to do that is to angle it down at about a 45-degree angle or so. Get that front lip in there, and then make sure it's seated in there. Before you apply any pressure onto there though, the best thing to do is just take a 3-second pause and run your hands out on there. if one of these ends of the stretcher strip is up just a little bit and you start to apply pressure, you can actually bend this aluminum connector, and aluminum doesn't like to bend back and forth many times before it breaks. So that's why we sent you an extra one in case that does happen, but you can really add to the life just taking those couple seconds anyway to put your hands on top of here and just push down. You'll feel if it rises up at all. So just kind of get that into the stretching process that you do. If you can build that in, these stretcher strips will last a long time for you. So as I've got this all seated, I like to put one hand on here because I can feel the hooks engaged. So I'll put a forearm on the handle, maybe put my other hand on the handle here, so it's all nice and stable and secure. Just pull back. This one doesn't have a lot of tension yet because we're just getting started. But one thing that's great to do is make sure you can take a peek on each end. Make sure that your tension bar is fully engaged on all three of the hooks. If you need to move this little frame lock over, you can, just to take a quick peek at that. That's no problem because that's doing all the work. So before you release pressure off the stretcher, it's really good to make sure that this tension bar is fully engaged on there. Really, really important. So if I take this off, I'll just lift it up, set that down on the holder. I'm gonna rotate around again to the long side here. So I'm working straight across. I'm pulling the majority of the mesh over right off the bat. That's gonna help stretch the majority of the mesh, but also reduce the amount of shock that we're gonna give to it. If we stretch the short ends first and then we did the longs after, it could really shock the mesh. So this is the best approach for the Easy Frame system. So again, I've got my stretcher strip loaded into my tension bar here. Just run your hands down it, make sure that's fully seated down. I'm just gonna start going and pushing down here. And typically you can hear it lock in and you can hear it click right in, but it's still an awesome practice to take a look at both ends, make sure it's fully engaged, especially when you're first learning how to use it and you don't recognize the clicks and everything. So that's locked in there and all good to go. So I've got both of my long sides done. Doesn't matter which short end you go to now, but you can load that in. Again, make sure that that stretcher strip is down. And it's good to just allow the hooks to engage onto the frame. No need to press really hard and go way past the hooks. Any amount that you go past the hook, you're really overstretching the mesh. So that's why I like to put that hand on there. As you're pushing down, you can feel it lock on and engage onto those hooks, and then it'll lock right back in, so you can kind of feel it lower down onto the hooks. So do a quick peek on both ends. Take that off. I'm gonna spin it around here to my final side. Make sure that that's all down, the stretcher strip's all good, and we'll start pressing down here on this final side. Now, if you have a mesh that doesn't have glue that goes all the way to the end, typically it's S mesh or thin thread mesh, or it's also finer threads, like even 180 and up. We'll come up short here just a little bit and we'll leave that loose. So the best thing to do when you're stretching just the short ends on the third hook is to actually push down on this rod. When you wiggle that rod back and forth on both ends here, that will actually extend a little bit of mesh going out. So those will actually possibly need a little bit of manual help to just increase a little bit of the softness in the corners. So you can do that just kind of by feeling it. Typically, if you just push down on it like that, it will release a little bit of mesh and you'll be good to go. This one does have the full perimeter glue because it's a 160, so I don't need to do that here, but it is something really to look out for. So put my hand here, come down to the final. Sometimes when it first goes down, if it doesn't quite engage, you can kind of rock it back and forth and just do that double check on the end there to make sure that it's fully seated. So once it is all good to go, you can just remove the frame locks from both ends here, take it out, and you're all set. So your Endurance Easy Frame is all set to go. Now over time, one of the cool things about the Endurance system is that you can add a rod. You can actually increase tension. But in order to do that, we need to remove one of the ends here. I've got an extra rod with me. It's most common that one of the short ends is going to need a little bit extra help. So when you have that, it's because of the length of the mesh. We've got more real estate here of mesh to pull and stretch, and that's the direction that you're pulling squeegee and flood bar. So it's usually the short ends that need a little bit extra help if you find that with your tension meter over time and you want to increase tension. I'll show you how to do that. This is where the removal angle comes in place. So it has a rubber backing on it, it's flexible. The rubber backing is actually going to go right up against where there's a white strip here on the side. It's going to go right up against that edge like so. And then you'll put your tensioning tool right on top of that. So what that's going to do is it's actually going to gain elevation, and then it will help us remove the tension bar off of the hooks by being a higher elevation. So I'm just going to put my little angle right here, and this is also how you can remove the fabric in general. If you just wanted to swap out mesh counts, if you wanted, some people even save a single color design, leave the emulsion on there and everything, clean off the ink of course, but save the emulsion design. If somebody's going to come back later and need some more prints, you could take it off, store it, you can stretch it back up with good accuracy. So that's something that you can do. But I've got my tool, and I'm going to load that in there. It's at a higher height now. You can see this is up above. Make sure that that stretcher strip is fully seated in there. For the removal process, you do it actually in the exact opposite order. So I'm starting on a short end. So if you wanted to completely remove this, you might think, oh, I always have to go to the long side. For removal, it's just that you just do it in reverse order. So you start on a short end, and you really want to put some firm pressure down on this tension bar, because when you disengage those hooks, I don't have a tension meter here unfortunately, but this is probably at least 30, 34, 35-ish newtons on there. So it's nice and tight. So when you have all that pressure built up on there, it's going to all want to release really quickly. So I'll put one firm hand here, got one hand on the stretcher here, and I'm going to push down a fair amount of pressure on there. But as that pops up, I push down on the handle, and as that pops up, this hand is going to help prevent the tool from climbing up the backside of the frame. The other thing that does a great job with that, and why we ended up doing rubber on the back of this, because it's really grippy, and that helps prevent the stretcher tool itself from climbing up over the back when you're removing it. So that's why we got the rubber on the back there. So I disengaged this. I'm totally free on this one end, on the short end. And what we're gonna do here is, when we installed the mesh, we put the rod inside the loop or the pocket on the outside perimeter of the panel all the way around. That's how you're always gonna load it. However, when you want to add an additional rod, if you want to increase tension, what's gonna happen is you're going to push the rod that's already in the loop forward. So we are not putting this rod in, we're not putting it inside the panel. It's actually going on the outside. But what this rod does is this pushes the other rod forward down inside the extrusion itself, which makes it smaller, which increases tension. So it's going on the outside edge of the pocket, so not inside the mesh. Once we've done that, we don't need the removal angle here anymore to re-stretch, because we're just going to go back to how we finished. And we will load this in. I need to move my frame locks in because I'm on hook 1, so it's pretty close tolerance there. Make sure, this is a great time to make sure that your stretcher strip is fully seated down in there. That could be a time when it would pop up when you're really, really close here on the ends. And we'll engage onto hook number 2. Make sure everything looks good, things are centered. If you saw that something wasn't centered and you need to make a change, then you can certainly just reintroduce the removal, back it off, center things up. with no pressure on it and then start again. But everything looks good here. It's nice and centered, so I'm just going to keep going and increase tension here. Let's make sure that these are fully engaged. We've got more tension here, so I just want to make sure that everything's locked in. Sometimes you just have to rock it back and forth as I did, and had my hand on there so I could kind of feel it engage. And notice that all the hooks were engaged on there, so we're all set and good to go. So I successfully added an additional, so I've got 2 rods on this end, and that would have increased tension on here. So you can do that on all 4 sides if needed, and just keep your fabric going as long as possible. Thanks so much for watching. You can see additional information at Shur-Loc.com.